A single gavel strike shatters a young man's future, but the fight for justice has only begun. Watch this story till the end, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. The gymnasium of Theodore Roosevelt High School pulsed with energy that late May afternoon. Families filled every row of the bleachers, fanning themselves with folded programs, whispering excitedly about their children crossing the stage. Banners with the school's blue and gold colors hung from the rafters, and the air smelled faintly of carnations and fresh varnish on the polished floor. At the center of it all stood 19-year-old Marcus Thompson, straight-backed in his navy gown, cap balanced carefully on his head, and the honor cord looped proudly around his shoulders. Principal Angela Martinez held up the gleaming medal that bore the word valedictorian across its face. "This young man," she declared into the microphone, "represents the very best of our school and our community." Marcus Thompson, Harvard-bound, with a full scholarship to study law. The applause crashed over him like a wave. His grandmother, Eleanor, seated in the front row with a tissue already soaked through, cried openly, rocking slightly as she whispered prayers of gratitude. When Marcus stepped across the stage, the medal resting against his chest, he allowed himself the smallest of smiles. For years, he had fought to keep his grades high while juggling a part-time job filing paperwork at a small neighborhood law firm. He had done homework under flickering kitchen lights, studied with worn textbooks, and written essays on a second-hand laptop. Now, the dream that had felt so far away was suddenly real. Harvard in the fall, the first step toward becoming the kind of lawyer who could fight injustice, not just endure it. That night, in their small southeast D.C. apartment, Eleanor made him his favorite dinner: fried chicken, collard greens, and cornbread. The old radio on the counter hummed out a gospel station while Marcus sat at the table in his gown, refusing to take it off yet. Eleanor touched his hand. "Your mama would be so proud," she whispered. Maria had been gone for 12 years, lost in a car accident that had left Eleanor to raise him alone. Marcus squeezed his grandmother's hand, too choked with emotion to answer. By morning, he decided to give himself a reward. He had saved $20 from his paycheck, enough to buy one indulgence before diving back into scholarship essays and summer reading assignments. Coffee from Heritage Coffee, the trendy cafe in Georgetown. He had walked past it a dozen times but had never stepped inside. The place always seemed filled with law students and interns, laptops open, latte cups beside them, a glimpse of the world he was preparing to enter. Today he would sit among them, a valedictorian medal in his pocket, a Harvard admission letter folded carefully in his jacket. The sun was already climbing when Marcus stepped off the bus and walked down M Street. Heritage Coffee gleamed with glass and marble, the kind of place that smelled like roasted beans and ambition. Inside, the air conditioning blasted cold, and the hiss of the espresso machines mingled with the clatter of keyboards. Customers in tailored suits and polished shoes sipped their drinks while scrolling through emails. Marcus straightened his shoulders, taking it all in. He belonged here, he told himself. He had earned this. At the counter, a young woman with highlighted hair and a bored expression tapped on her phone. Her name tag read Ashley. She didn't look up when Marcus approached. "Good morning," Marcus said politely. "I'd like a medium coffee, whatever your house blend is." Ashley's thumbs continued moving. "We're out." Marcus blinked, confused. Behind her, the machines puffed steam, and cups were stacked high, ready to be filled. Customers in line were walking away with fresh drinks. "Out of coffee?" he asked carefully. She glanced at him briefly, then returned to her phone. "Out of your kind of coffee?" Her voice grew louder, sharp enough to draw glances from nearby tables. "Maybe try the McDonald's down the street. That's more your speed." The cafe went silent. Marcus felt heat creeping into his face, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm a paying customer. I just want the same service as anyone else." Ashley rolled her eyes and called over her shoulder, "Kyle, we've got a situation." From the back stepped the manager, a tall man with slicked hair and the kind of confidence that comes from family money. His name was Kyle Morrison, and he wore his role like theater. "What's the problem?" he asked, already looking at Marcus with dismissal. "This guy's being aggressive," Ashley said quickly, gesturing toward him. "I told him we're out, but he keeps demanding." "I haven't raised my voice," Marcus said, still calm though his chest tightened. "I asked for a cup of coffee." That's all. Kyle moved closer, invading Marcus's space. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "You're making my staff uncomfortable." Marcus's jaw clenched, but he refused to step back. "I'm not leaving. If you want me gone, you'll have to explain to the police why asking for coffee is disturbing the peace." Kyle smirked, pulling out his phone. "Gladly." He dialed 911 with exaggerated flourish. "Yes, I need officers at Heritage Coffee. We have an individual threatening staff and refusing to leave." Marcus stood still, his hands visible at his sides, forcing himself to breathe slowly. Around him, patrons whispered, some recording with their phones, some staring at him like he was an exhibit. He thought about his grandmother, about the pride on her face yesterday. He thought about Harvard, about the dream within reach, and he thought about how quickly all of it could vanish. 15 minutes later, the cafe door swung open and 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. Officer Bradley Carter, tall and broad, scanned the room. Beside him, Officer Maria Santos adjusted her belt as Kyle and Ashley rushed forward. "That's him," Kyle said. "He's been aggressive, refused to leave, scaring customers." Marcus raised his hands slightly, palms open. "Officers, I didn't do anything wrong. I asked for coffee and was denied because of my race. That's all." But the words fell into silence. Carter moved behind him, the click of handcuffs sounding like a verdict already passed. Santos began reciting his rights as Ashley smirked from behind the counter. Through the glass window, Marcus saw his reflection as they turned him toward the door. His graduation suit still neat, his valedictorian pin still gleaming in the morning light, and yet shackles now circled his wrists. The customers in line turned away, murmuring. Outside, the city bustled as though nothing unusual had happened. As the officers guided him into the waiting cruiser, Marcus felt the weight of the medal in his pocket. Yesterday, it had been a symbol of triumph. Today, it mocked him, a reminder that, in America, achievement did not always shield you from suspicion. The door shut, sealing him in the back seat. He looked out through the glass one last time as Heritage Coffee receded into the distance. Somewhere deep inside, a fear began to settle, but so did a quiet resolve. This was only the beginning. This was only the beginning. By the time the transport van rolled through the service entrance of the E. Barrett Prettyman Courthouse, the sun had climbed high enough to bleach the steps outside into a hard white glare. Marcus felt each bump in the concrete through the metal bench, the chain at his waist ticking faintly against the cuffs like a metronome, keeping time for someone else's life. A deputy cracked the door and the stale chill of the loading bay washed over him. He stepped down in his graduation suit and scuffed dress shoes, the valedictorian pin still tucked into his inside pocket because he didn't know where else to put the last proof of who he'd been 48 hours earlier. Upstairs, the docket board flickered with case numbers. The hallway buzzed with the routine business of justice. Clerks carrying stacks of files, lawyers huddled around tablets, families waiting on benches with nervous hands and styrofoam cups of coffee. His appointed public defender, Sarah Mitchell, found him outside courtroom 23 with her hair pulled into a quick bun and a legal pad already scribbled over. She looked young enough to be a grad student and tired enough to be everyone's lawyer. "I'm Sarah," she said softly, as if sound itself could bruise. "I just got the file. Misdemeanor trespass and a disorderly conduct citation. Will waive reading, plead not guilty, set a status. Worst case, community service. Best case, dismissal. It should be quick." Marcus nodded. "Thank you." She squeezed his elbow once. "I know it's scary. We'll get you through across the building." In a narrow office, paneled in old wood and older ego, Judge Harrison Wells adjusted the cuffs of his robe before a freckled mirror and studied his reflection with the care of a man who had been seen his whole life and wanted badly to be seen again. 58, silver at the temples, shoulders still square from a lifetime of straight-backed rooms. On his wall, photos with senators who had passed through and up, framed letters praising his unflinching resolve, clippings from editorial boards that once believed the Republic could be saved by louder gavels. Election cycles had come and gone. Promotions had come close and gone, too. 3 times the appellate seat had drifted past like a ship in fog. But this summer, his name was on the short list again. The Attorney General's office had scheduled a meeting. Finally, a meeting. And the staffer on the phone had used the word the ambitious learn to both crave and distrust. Promising. Wells straightened the tie beneath his robe and picked up the morning's calendar. Routine, routine, plea, sentencing, routine. One name stood out, circled in pencil from last night's review: United States versus Marcus Thompson. He'd flagged it himself. Not typical for a trespass case to land in his courtroom, but case assignment glitches happen in busy courthouses, and sometimes a judge with a reputation for order needs to demonstrate exactly what order looks like. He set the file on the bench as he took his seat. "All rise." The clerk's voice cut through the murmur. Everyone in the gallery stood, including Eleanor Thompson, who clutched her purse like a life preserver and stared at the seal over the judge's head as if it might transform back into something she believed in. Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Hayes slid into place at the government's table, face professionally neutral, a yellow legal pad aligned perfectly with the table's edge. Sarah guided Marcus to the defense table and leaned in. "Breathe," she whispered. "Answer only if asked. Let me do the talking." Wells scanned the room, found the defendant, and held that stare a second longer than necessary. A clean suit, a young face set carefully into composure. The kind of composure that irritated him more than arrogance. He glanced at the short memo the case coordinator had tucked into the folder. Defendant appeared at Heritage Coffee, refused to leave after lawful instruction by staff, escalated, crowd gathered, business disrupted. Noted, Harvard bound, valedictorian. The last 2 words he circled in darker pencil. The clerk called the case. "United States versus Marcus Thompson." Hayes rose. "Good mornin', Your Honor." Sarah rose. "Good mornin', Your Honor." Sarah Mitchell, for Mr. Thompson, who is present. Wells steepled his fingers. "Charges?" Hayes cleared her throat. "Misdemeanor, trespass, D.C., Code 22-3302 and disorderly conduct, 22-1321. The government is amenable to—" Wells lifted one finger. "I'll hear from you in a moment, Ms. Hayes." He turned his gaze to the defense table. "Mr. Thompson." Marcus stood slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." "You've been in the news," Wells said, as if reporting weather. "Young man with a bright future." Valedictorian. He let the word sit on his tongue like something sour. "Tell me, did that future feel like a license to terrorize a small business and bully its staff?" "Objection," Sarah said carefully. "Argumentative. We're here for an arraignment. I'm simply asking the defendant to address conduct that interfered with commerce," Wells said, voice cool. Mr. Thompson. Marcus kept his shoulders square. With respect, Your Honor, I asked to buy a cup of coffee like everyone else. I was told they were out of my kind. When I refused to leave without being served, they called the police. I did not threaten anyone. I did not raise my voice. A ripple moved through the gallery, a current of sympathetic groans and skeptical sniffs. Wells tapped the file with his pen. Police reports describe you as hostile and non-compliant. The cameras were down, Marcus said, and even his own lawyer winced at the detail because it sounded like every story that never finds a witness. But people were filming on their phones. Sarah tugged gently at the sleeve of his jacket. Enough. Wells leaned back. Ms. Hayes, the government's position? Hayes stood. For a moment, something uncertain flickered across her face, the look of a prosecutor who knows the system is a machine and also knows it can grind too fine. The government is prepared to offer a standard disposition, time served, community service, a stay-away order from the premises. We do not seek jail. Do you seek justice? Wells snapped, the question theatrical and practiced. Because what I read here is not a boy with a bright future. It's a pattern of disregard. Sarah blinked. Pattern? Your Honor, my client has no criminal record. Wells shuffled papers as if to find what wasn't there. Civil citations, jaywalking, a school incident, those were dismissed, Sarah said, heat rising for the first time. They are not in evidence. Disregard compounds, Wells intoned, and when a person disrupts a business, frightens staff, and incites a crowd, we are not in the realm of teenage misjudgment. We are in the realm of targeted interference with commerce. He angled his chin toward Hayes. There is a federal statute that captures conduct designed to intimidate and coerce economic actors. Hayes hesitated. Your Honor, respectfully, the facts here do not rise to any terror-related framework. These are local charges. The government does not allege. The court is not bound by your lack of imagination, Wells said. Words matter. Consequences matter. Messages matter. Sarah took a breath, measured her tone. Your Honor, this is an arraignment. We are getting ahead of ourselves and outside the record. My client intends to plead not guilty. He is a valedictorian with a Harvard admission. He has a grandmother in the gallery who depends on him financially. He was refused service after a comment about his kind. He stood his ground and waited for officers. There was no weapon, no threat, no damage. Wells turned his eyes to the gallery. Eleanor's lips moved around a prayer she'd learned as a child and never thought she would use here. He looked back at Marcus. Stand up straight, he said, as if posture were a lever attached to character. Do you understand that actions have consequences? Yes, Your Honor, Marcus said. I also understand rights. Wells's mouth thinned. Rights exist within order. Order is what keeps this city from drowning in grievance. Hayes cleared her throat again. Your Honor, our offer stands. We can be done with this today. We will be done with this today, Wells said, but not with a broom to sweep it under a rug. Sarah placed both palms flat on counsel table, grounding herself. Sentencing without a plea or a trial would be extraordinary and reversible. If the court insists on proceeding, we request a continuance to prepare a mitigation memorandum and to obtain witness statements from the cafe. Wells shook his head, already past her. He fixed Marcus again. Any final statement before I impose sentence? Sarah leaned in. You don't have to say anything. Marcus's throat worked. The room felt hot, then cold. He thought of a kitchen radio and collard greens. He thought of blue and gold banners in his grandmother's hands. He took one breath and let it out. With respect, Your Honor, he said, voice steady. "I asked to be treated like a customer. If standing still and asking for coffee is a threat to commerce, then the problem is not my behavior. It's the way we decide who counts." A murmur swelled in the back rows, sharpened by someone's soft, "That's right," and pricked by someone else's scoff. Hayes looked down at her pad. Sarah closed her eyes. Wells lifted the gavel an inch, lowered it without striking, savoring the moment that felt like control. "Contempt disguised as civility," he said, "the most corrosive kind. This city is full of young men who imagine diplomas are armor. They are not." He straightened the stack of papers he'd barely read. Marcus Thompson, for conduct that disrupted lawful business operations, for refusal to comply with lawful instructions, for inciting public disorder, and for your unrepentant posture before this court, I sentence you, Your Honor. Sarah broke in, her voice louder than she meant. "Respectfully, this is unmoored from any statute or guideline to life imprisonment," Wells finished, raising the gavel high enough that the lights flashed over its face, "without the possibility of parole." The sound when it came was a crack of wood and air and something else breaking. Eleanor's scream tore the room in two. A pen clattered across tile. Someone shouted, "What?" and someone else, "No!" And the marshal by the door moved, because that's what marshals do when chaos wants a shape. Sarah's legal pad slid to the floor, paper skittering like startled birds. Jennifer Hayes went pale, the careful government line suddenly a cliff's edge she had not seen in the fog. Marcus did not move at first. He stared at the seal again, at the eagle that meant something in civics textbooks and something else entirely when a man in a robe said your life was over. The deputy touched his elbow. He swallowed once. Wells leaned forward, enjoying the scene the way an actor listens for applause. "Perhaps," he said into the noise, each syllable amplified by the quieting microphones, "this will teach people to respect the rule of law." Sarah found her breath. "We object," she said hoarsely. "We object to the process, the basis, the sentence, everything. We request immediate reconsideration. We request bail pending appeal. We request—" "Denied," Wells said, not bothering to look at her. "Take him." As the deputy stepped in with shackles, Eleanor lurched from the bench. "Please," she cried, voice cracking open. "Please, Your Honor." "He's a good boy. He's all I have." "Ma'am," the marshal warned gently, a hand extended to keep her from the aisle. "He didn't do anything," she begged. "He asked for coffee. Lord help me, he just asked for coffee." Wells's face closed, a door without hinges. "Remove her," he said, and the marshal didn't. He only guided her back into her seat and let her weep, because there are small rebellions even in tidy rooms. They looped the chain at Marcus's waist, the cuffs a bit colder than before. Sarah touched his shoulder. "I'm not done," she whispered, desperate and furious. "Do you hear me?" "I'm not done," he nodded, not trusting his voice. He turned his head until he found Eleanor's eyes. She mouthed, "I love you." He said the words back with his lips, then watched them disappear into the space between them where sentences hang like smoke. The deputy opened the side door to the detention corridor. For a heartbeat, Marcus saw himself reflected in its wired glass. Suit clean, tie straight, the person he'd been shaped by home and work and hope. Then the door swung and the reflection split into 1,000 distortions, a kaleidoscope of courthouse light and hallway shadow. Behind him, Wells gathered his papers one by one, built the neat stack that finished the picture. A long-serving judge, a handled docket, a message sent. He did not see the way Hayes's hands shook as she capped her pen. He did not see Sarah kneel to collect her pages with fingers that pressed so hard they ached. He did not see Eleanor's shoulders heave like a boat and chop. He saw only his own future, smoothed and waiting. He imagined a handshake in a corner office, a nod across a mahogany desk, the word congratulations. He pictured the appellate robe, thicker, somehow straighter, and the way headlines look when they use words like courage. In the corridor, the fluorescent lights hummed and the air smelled like floor wax. The chain at Marcus's waist clicked in slow time with the deputy's boots. He tried to call up the sound of applause from 2 days ago, but it wouldn't carry this far. Instead, he heard a single line from Principal Martinez's speech, something small and stubborn. This young man represents the very best of our community. He held to it the way a drowning swimmer holds to air. When the door closed behind him, the courtroom returned to its choreography. The clerk stamping orders, the court reporter rewinding her machine, the next case lining up like airplanes on a runway. Wells signed the order without looking down at the pages. The message, he told himself, had been sent. The chaos he had unleashed had only just begun to arrive. The holding cell smelled of bleach and iron, the kind of sterile stink that sank into skin no matter how hard you tried not to breathe. Marcus sat on a narrow bench, his back against the cold concrete wall. His graduation suit was wrinkled now, sweat darkening the collar, the valedictorian pin pressing into his chest from the inside pocket where he'd shoved it after court. His hands trembled, not from the chill but from the weight of what had just happened. Life without parole. The words echoed in his head like a drumbeat, each repetition threatening to drown out everything else. An officer opened the door just wide enough to slide in a battered phone on a cord. "One call," he said, flat, already walking away. Marcus stared at the phone. Who was there to call? Harvard's admissions office? His friends from school? None of them could undo the gavel's thunder. Only one name mattered. He punched in his grandmother's number with shaking fingers. "Grandma," he said when Eleanor's weary voice answered. "They gave me life. Life in prison." The sound she made was somewhere between a sob and a gasp. "I know, baby. I was there. I saw you said something in the courtroom," Marcus whispered, eyes darting to the corners of the cell like the walls themselves might be listening. "You said his father would never forgive me. You've always told me I didn't have a father. What did you mean?" Silence stretched. Eleanor's breaths rasped through the receiver, heavy, uneven. "Baby, there's something I should have told you a long time ago." Marcus leaned forward, pressing the phone so tightly to his ear it hurt. "Tell me now." "Your father didn't abandon you," she whispered. "He didn't disappear. He's alive. He's David Thompson." The world tilted. Marcus gripped the cord with his free hand as if it might hold him steady. David Thompson? Like the Attorney General? "Yes," Eleanor choked out. "The Attorney General of the United States. He's your father." The phone almost slipped from Marcus's grasp. He pressed it back against his ear, his pulse hammering so loud he could barely hear. "You're telling me the man who runs the Department of Justice, the man I see on TV talking about fairness and civil rights, he's my father, and he doesn't even know I exist?" Tears streamed down Eleanor's cheeks as she clutched her own receiver in the crowded courthouse hallway. "He knows you were born, baby. Your mama told him the night you came into this world, but she also told him to go, to build his career. She believed a poor black family would ruin his chances before he even started. After she died, I made him promise to stay away. I told him you needed to make your own path without his world crushing you. For years, he sent money through a lawyer. He doesn't know it was for you, Marcus," pressed his forehead against the wall, cold, seeping into his skin. Betrayal burned in his chest. 19 years. You let me think I was alone. You let me think I didn't have a father. And all this time I was protecting you," Eleanor sobbed. "I thought I was doing right. But when I saw that judge steal your life, I couldn't keep it anymore. He's your father, Marcus, and he's the only one with the power to save you." The line clicked, the officer yanking the phone away. Marcus bowed frozen, his mind a storm of rage, confusion, and the faintest flicker of hope. Across town, in a mahogany-paneled office overlooking the Capitol Dome, Attorney General David Thompson reviewed briefing papers on an international terrorism case. He was composed, as always, salt and pepper hair immaculately styled, his tailored suit unwrinkled even after 12 hours at the desk. On the wall hung framed photographs of him shaking hands with presidents, standing with Supreme Court justices speaking at podiums draped with American flags. A knock broke his concentration. His secretary, Rachel Green, stepped in, her expression uneasy. "Sir, there's an elderly woman on line 3. She says it's urgent, personal." She gave her name as Eleanor Thompson. David's pen froze mid-signature. The name cracked open a door he had kept locked for 12 years. He remembered the funeral, the way Eleanor had looked at him across the casket of her daughter Maria, the woman he had once loved, and told him to stay away from the boy. He needs to make his own path. He had obeyed, burying the ache under ambition. "Put her through," David said, voice hoarse. The line clicked and Eleanor's trembling words spilled through. "David, it's Eleanor. Your son needs you." David blinked, his body locking in place. "My what?" "Marcus," she said, breaking down into sobs. "He's your son, David." They sentenced him today. Life without parole, for coffee, for being black in the wrong cafe. Judge Harrison Wells. "He took him from me. He'll never see daylight again unless you do something." David rose to his feet so fast his chair toppled. "Eleanor, what are you saying?" "My son?" "Yes," she whispered. 19 years old, valedictorian, Harvard-bound. Your son to David's breath caught in his throat. The papers slipped from his hands and scattered across the desk. He staggered to the drawer he never opened, the one with the faded photograph inside. Himself as a young law student holding a newborn. Maria smiling with exhaustion beside him. He had looked at it only in secret, punishing himself with the life he could never climb. Now that life was real, and in prison. "Life without parole," Eleanor repeated, sobbing harder. "They're going to bury him alive. And he's yours, David. He's your son." For a long moment, David couldn't speak. Then something ancient and furious ignited inside him. "Eleanor, listen to me. I need every detail. The judge's name, the case number, the charges. Judge Harrison Wells," she whispered. David's face went pale. He gripped the edge of his desk, the pieces falling together like shards of glass. Wells, the man whose brother he had prosecuted 20 years ago for campaign finance embezzlement. The brother who had died in prison. Wells had waited all this time. And when the perfect target appeared, young, black, brilliant, and bearing the name Thompson, he had struck. David's voice hardened into steel. "Get me everything on Judge Harrison Wells. Every case file, every sentence, every complaint. I want his entire record on my desk in 30 minutes. "Sir," Rachel said carefully, "you have a 2:00 meeting scheduled with Judge Wells." About his promotion to the Court of Appeals, David's eyes flashed with fury. "Cancel nothing. Let him come. But when he sits across from me, he won't be meeting a sponsor for his career. He'll be meeting the father of the boy he just tried to destroy." Back in the holding cell, Marcus sat with his head in his hands, the truth echoing like thunder in his skull. His father was the Attorney General, the most powerful law enforcement official in the nation, and for the first time since the gavel fell, Marcus felt something other than despair. He felt the stirrings of a fight. Judge Harrison Wells adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror of his silver Lexus, parked it neatly in the underground garage of the Department of Justice. His navy suit was freshly pressed, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. For 23 years, he had labored in the trenches of the federal judiciary, handing down sentences that earned him nods from politicians and clippings in conservative newspapers. Today, all that effort was about to pay off. In 13 minutes, he would meet with the Attorney General himself, David Thompson, the man whose signature could propel him to the Court of Appeals, the robe he had dreamed of wearing for a decade. Wells smiled at his reflection, oblivious to the storm gathering on the other side of those marble walls. In his corner office, overlooking Pennsylvania Avenue, Attorney General David Thompson stood like a man preparing for battle. His staff had cleared the conference table, now covered with binders, statistical charts, and printed emails. Each document told the same story. Judge Wells's court was not a neutral forum, but a machine that punished black defendants at nearly triple the rate of their white counterparts. More damning still were the emails between Wells and Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Hayes, discussing Marcus's case weeks before the hearing. One line stood out in bold red ink: "Educated young black males are the most dangerous. They think diplomas entitle them to special treatment. This one needs an example." David stared at the words, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. He thought of the boy in the holding cell, the son he had never known, the son who bore his name in secret, and of the gavel that had stolen his future. Wells had not just abused his authority. He had targeted Marcus as revenge for a grudge 20 years old. David's deputy, Lauren Pierce, entered quietly. "Sir, Wells just arrived. He's being escorted up." David straightened his tie and slid the incriminating folder into place on the desk. "Good. Make sure the FBI's recording equipment is live." "Yes, sir." The door opened, and Wells strode in with practiced confidence, his hand extended. "Mr. Attorney General," he said warmly, "it's an honor to finally meet you." "I appreciate you making time." David did not take the hand. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down, Judge." Wells faltered for a fraction of a second, then recovered, lowering himself into the leather chair. He cleared his throat. "I trust you've reviewed my record." 23 years on the bench, consistently firm sentencing, an unwavering commitment to law and order. "Just this morning I dealt with a case that demonstrates the exact kind of resolve the appellate court needs." David leaned forward slightly, his voice low and measured. "Tell me about that case." Wells perked up. "A so-called valedictorian, Harvard-bound. The media's already whining, but in my courtroom he was belligerent, entitled. He disrupted commerce, refused lawful orders. I sentenced him appropriately, life without parole. It was the right call, Mr. Attorney General. Educated criminals are the most dangerous kind." David's hands gripped the edge of the desk so tightly the wood groaned under the pressure. He inhaled once, steadying himself. "Do you know the defendant's name?" Wells waved a hand dismissively. "Thompson, Marcus Thompson. Another fatherless troublemaker, no doubt. The type who think they can game the system with grades and charm." David stood, his tall frame casting a shadow across the desk. His voice was calm, but each word landed like a hammer. "That young man is my son." The color drained from Wells's face. His mouth opened, then closed again, soundless. "You're son?" "My son," David repeated, steel in his voice, 19 years old, valedictorian, Harvard scholarship, a boy you decided to bury alive in federal prison, not because of the law, not because of justice, but because you hate what he represents. I didn't know," Wells stammered, sweat rising on his brow. "If I had known," David's voice cracked like thunder, "if you had known, you would have treated him differently? You've just confessed exactly what kind of judge you are, one who dispenses sentences based on power and connections, not truth." Wells tried to stand, but David's command cut him down. "Sit down." He collapsed back into the chair, trembling. David pulled the incriminating emails from the folder and spread them across the desk. "Do you deny these are your words? Calling my son a threat because he is young, black, and educated? Calling for his destruction as a warning to others?" Wells shook his head, mumbling, "I was under pressure." "Political expectations? The law is not your stage," David snapped. "You turned the bench into a weapon. You manipulated case assignments to get Marcus in your courtroom. You colluded with a prosecutor to exaggerate charges. You called him a terrorist for asking to be served coffee, and then you came here expecting me to reward you with a promotion." Tears welled in Wells's eyes, not from remorse, but terror. "David, please. I can fix this. I can reduce the sentence. I can—" "There is no fixing this." David's voice dropped to a whisper more terrifying than a shout. "Do you have children, Harrison?" Wells nodded weakly. "Then imagine someone stealing their future, their dignity, their freedom because of the color of their skin. Imagine them shackled, condemned, while their only crime was existing in the wrong cafe." Wells broke down, sobbing now, his career unraveling before his eyes. "Please," he begged, "don't ruin me." David stood tall, his fury contained within a prosecutor's precision. "You ruined yourself, and now the system you corrupted will judge you." He opened the door. 2 FBI agents and 2 U.S. Marshals stepped inside, their faces impassive. "Judge Harrison Wells," David said, his voice carrying the weight of both father and attorney general. "You are hereby suspended from the bench pending investigation. You will face charges of civil rights violations, judicial misconduct, and conspiracy to deny equal protection under the law." As the agents snapped handcuffs onto the same wrists that had lifted a gavel hours earlier, Wells's eyes pleaded one last time. But David didn't look at him. His gaze was fixed on the photograph inside his desk drawer, a young man holding a newborn. For 19 years he had believed that staying away meant protection. He had been wrong. Now he would not stay away again. In the holding cell across town, Marcus sat with his head bowed, his heart heavy with betrayal and fear. He did not know that at that very moment the man who had sentenced him was being led away in chains. He did not know that his father was moving heaven and earth to bring him home. But he felt something stir inside him, a faint glimmer that refused to die. Hope. The corridor outside Courtroom 1 sounded different in a crisis. Phones rang without rhythm, doors opened and closed with the urgency of a hospital, and the air vibrated with the muffled rush of a crowd that had not yet decided whether to cheer or to rage. A marshal guided Marcus from the holding area toward the double doors, the chain at his waist gone now, the cuffs removed. His graduation suit still held its creases despite the hours. When he glanced at a narrow pane of wire-reinforced glass, he caught a ghosted reflection, older by a day, but carrying the same careful posture his grandmother had taught him. Shoulders back, chin level, do not let the world see you bow. Inside, Chief Judge Maria Rodriguez had already taken the bench. She was known for even temperament and a spine that didn't bend under cameras. The courtroom, the same one where the gavel had fallen like a sentence on the country itself, was standing room only. Clerks squeezed along the walls. Reporters angled lenses between shoulders. In the front row, Eleanor Thompson clutched a tissue in one hand and a small, battered Bible in the other. At the defense table, Sarah Mitchell stood ready, a legal pad open to a page with 5 bullet points and underlines pressed so hard the paper had almost torn. The back doors swung, and the room shifted as if a tide had turned. Attorney General David Thompson entered with attorneys from the Civil Rights Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office. He did not look toward the cameras. He did not look toward the gallery. He carried a single binder and the expression of a man who had decided what must happen and had already accepted the weight of it. "Call the matter," Judge Rodriguez said. The clerk's voice carried. "United States versus Marcus Thompson." David rose. "Your Honor, on behalf of the United States, we move to vacate the conviction and sentence entered earlier today and to dismiss all charges with prejudice." A wave of sound rolled through the gallery and then snapped back to silence as Rodriguez lifted a hand. "On what basis?" she asked. David opened the binder. Newly surfaced evidence establishes that the proceedings were irreparably tainted by judicial bias and improper coordination. Data analysis shows that in Judge Wells's courtroom, black defendants received sentences nearly 3 times longer than white defendants convicted of comparable offenses. More specifically, emails recovered today reflect deliberate manipulation of the case assignment system and prejudicial intent toward Mr. Thompson, including a directive to make an example of educated young black males. He handed up copies. The judge read quickly, eyes moving the way a trained violinist hears key changes. When she finished, she looked to the government's table. Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Hayes stood, color drained from her face. "Ms. Hayes," Rodriguez said evenly, "does the United States stand behind this motion?" Hayes swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." "The government concurs." Rodriguez turned to the defense. "Miss Mitchell?" Sarah's voice was steady. "We join. We also ask the court to order Mr. Thompson's immediate release." The judge sat back. For a long beat, the room was quiet enough that Marcus could hear the low whir of the court reporter's machine. Rodriguez closed the binder, placed both hands on the bench, and spoke. "This court will not permit its authority to be used as a cloak for prejudice or its procedures to become a stage for personal vendetta. The record is corrupted beyond repair. The conviction and sentence are vacated. All charges are dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Thompson is free to go." The gavel fell again. This time, the crack did not break anything. It mended. Eleanor's cry rose, not the torn sound of earlier, but a sharp burst of joy. She pressed the Bible to her lips. Sarah's shoulders dropped, the fight easing out in a single breath that left her eyes wet. Cameras clicked like hail on a tin roof. Marcus did not move. The words sank, slow and heavy as an anchor finding riverbed. The marshal at his side stepped back. Sarah touched his sleeve. "You can go," she said softly. He turned. The man from the television, the one who spoke about statutes and hate crimes and consent decrees, was already walking down the well toward him. He stopped as if the floor had a line that could not be crossed without acknowledging everything behind it. "Marcus," David said. It was the first time he had used his son's name in a room where anybody could hear. Up close, the Attorney General's face was different than on the news. The control was still there, but unguarded grief had left its mark, etched at the corners of his eyes, cut deeper along his mouth. He did not offer his hand. "I don't deserve to ask anything of you," he said, careful so that the words didn't break. "But I owe you the truth. I am your father." The room blurred. Not from cameras or applause, but from the pressure of a life's worth of questions trying to form at once. Marcus found Eleanor's eyes. She nodded through tears. Cheers, her free hand pressed to her heart. You are? He managed. I should have been here long ago, David said. I told myself distance was protection. I was wrong. I am here now, and I will not leave you to face any part of this alone. For a second, neither moved. Then Eleanor came down the aisle with surprising speed for a woman her age, and all three met in a tangle of arms that made a circle out of 19 years. Reporters lowered their cameras. Even the marshal looked away. When they separated, Judge Rodriguez cleared her throat gently. Mr. Thompson, she said to David, the court appreciates the promptness with which the department addressed this. David inclined his head. The court acted first, Your Honor. We followed. Rodriguez nodded once. This courtroom is adjourned. Outside, the plaza had become a town square. Students held handmade signs, clergy linked arms. Legal aid lawyers who had lost more than they had won stood shoulder to shoulder with professors who taught them how to keep going anyway. A chant started, fumbled, found its rhythm, and rose. Marcus stepped into the light and the noise, flanked by Sarah and Eleanor. David paused just inside the doors, conferring with the Civil Rights Division chief, then joined them. Microphones pushed forward. Questions flew like a flock startled from a wire. Mr. Attorney General, was the judge arrested? Is this part of a broader pattern? What happens to the other sentences? David didn't step to a podium. He stopped on the top step, the courthouse behind him and the city in front, and spoke without notes. Power exists to protect, he said. It is not a prop. It is not a weapon. Today, this court corrected a grave wrong. Tomorrow, we begin the work of ensuring that no one else disappears into a system bent by bias. He turned to his son. And today, I ask your permission to stand next to you, not as Attorney General, but as your father. Marcus's throat tightened. He nodded. Cameras snapped, but the moment didn't belong to them. It belonged to the three people inside a small circle of air that felt, finally, improbably safe. In the days that followed, the system did what systems do when forced awake. It ground and lit and argued and moved. Judge Harrison Wells was processed at the same federal facility whose corridors he had watched other men walk, fingerprinted under fluorescent lights that did not care about resumes. A grand jury returned an indictment for civil rights violations under color of law, deprivation of rights, and conspiracy. His chambers were sealed. Boxes labeled evidence left the courthouse under chain of custody. The judicial conduct process accelerated from a cautious stroll to a sprint. At the U.S. Attorney's Office, Jennifer Hayes sat across from an internal review panel, her yellow legal pad replaced by a glass of water she didn't drink. She resigned before the week ended. Bar Counsel opened a file. On M Street, Heritage Coffee tried to reopen with a new statement about values and community. Protesters lined the sidewalk. Then the line moved inside and the customers stopped coming. A for lease sign went up where the menu had glowed. The espresso machines went quiet. At Main Justice, the Marcus Thompson Initiative launched under the Civil Rights Division. A national audit of sentencing data and case assignment patterns with teeth. U.S. attorneys received directives to flag outlier judges and refer anomalies to pattern and practice teams. Federal public defenders were invited to submit dossiers of cases that had always felt wrong but never had oxygen. Courts across the circuits scheduled trainings on implicit bias that weren't window dressing. Not boxes checked, but questions asked, numbers confronted, habits relearned. Clerks who had only ever whispered doubts began to speak them aloud in chambers. Marcus watched some of it from a distance and some of it up close. Summer blurred into orientation packets and housing forms stamped with a crimson seal. Boxes of books arrived at Eleanor's apartment. He packed between court updates, between long, quiet dinners where he and David learned the scarred geography of each other's lives, what radio station he loved for late-night studying, which case had kept David awake for a month, which meals Eleanor could make blindfolded, which stories they would never tell in rooms with microphones. On a Friday in August, Marcus stood in the kitchen while Eleanor wrapped cornbread in foil for a trip up the northeast corridor. David leaned against the doorframe, tie loose, jacket off, sleeves rolled twice. It was an ordinary scene, and for that reason it nearly undid him. "Harvard's going to change you," Eleanor said, handing Marcus the warm bundle, "but don't you let it make you forget where your backbone came from." "I won't," he said. David cleared his throat. "Your first-year schedule is brutal," he said, and then the smile cringed at himself because he'd meant to say something like, "I love you," and instead produced a syllabus. Marcus laughed, the sound light for the first time since the cafe. "Good," he said. "I'd like hard things to be honest about being hard." On the platform, just before the doors closed, David put a hand on his son's shoulder. "You asked me in that courtroom if you belonged," he said. "You don't have to ask that again. Anywhere you stand, you belong." The train pulled away. In the window, Marcus lifted a palm. Eleanor lifted hers back. David did, too. 3 hands in the same line for a heartbeat, then the car slipped into afternoon. The fall brought casebooks and cold air. It brought classrooms full of voices, some loud with certainty, some careful with curiosity, arguing about standards of review and remedies, about everything the law could be and too often was not. Marcus found a seat near the middle, where he could listen and still be asked to speak. His professors knew his name before the seating chart caught up. Most didn't bring up the case. The ones who did kept it brief and humane. In constitutional law, when the day's docket reached equal protection, a student raised a hand. "Aren't we talking about a few bad actors?" she asked. "Outliers." The professor glanced toward Marcus, then away. He answered with cases and citations. When class ended, he stopped Marcus at the door. "You don't owe anyone your story," he said. "I know," Marcus replied. He walked to the library and wrote for 3 hours without looking up. When he finished, he had the bones of a paper that would become When Justice Wears a Father's Face. He did not write about Wells by name. He wrote about systems that bend toward comfort unless someone forces them toward truth. He wrote about oversight as a kind of love, not of institutions, but of the people inside them. By winter, he had an internship offer from the Civil Rights Division. He sent Eleanor a photo of his badge. She taped it to the refrigerator with 3 magnets and wept quietly while she made stew. He sent David a calendar hold the way lawyers do when they mean something personal. Lunch. Your place or mine. Not optional. They ate at his desk, 2 case files between sandwiches. It felt less like penance and more like repair. Spring arrived with a kind of clarity. On a wind-bright afternoon in Cambridge, graduation gowns threaded across the yard like rivers. Marcus stood at a podium looking out over a sea of mortarboards and the kind of faces that fill yearbooks and courtrooms with equal probability. The cameras found him because cameras find certain stories. 3 years ago, he began, voice even, a judge told me I would die in prison for asking to be served coffee. Today, I am standing here because people with power used it to protect instead of to punish, and because people without power refused to be quiet when the silence would have been easier. He spoke not about punishment, but about truth, not about villains, but about vigilance. He did not say Wells's name. He said Eleanor's. He said Sarah's. He said David's, not as a title, but as a father. "Your degrees will open doors," he said, looking directly into the lens that would carry him into living rooms and barber shops and break rooms. "The question is whether you will hold those doors for others or close them behind you. If justice is only what happens in a courtroom, then we have reduced it to a schedule. Make it a promise." The audience stood. The applause swept across the yard and broke against the old brick like weather. In the front row, Eleanor dabbed at her eyes and laughed at herself for crying again. David did not clap right away. He pressed a fist against his lips and let the pride come without apology. Afterward, father and son walked beneath trees that had shaded other beginnings. They did not talk about the case. They talked about dinner, about a game on TV, about whether it would rain. On a path where the light cut through leaves and sliced the day into generous pieces, Marcus reached into his pocket. He took out the valedictorian pin that had glinted under fluorescent bulbs the day everything had broken, and he pinned it to his gown, not as a relic, as a marker. Across the river, in a storage room where evidence waits for trials that may never come, a wooden gavel sat in a labeled box. It would be opened by someone someday for reasons that would be procedural and dry. The gavel would not know it had once tried to end a boy. It would not know it had failed. And in a kitchen in southeast D.C., a radio played a gospel station softly while a grandmother set 3 plates on a table and smiled at the ordinary holiness of a new beginning. Justice can be delayed, but it can never be silenced. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters.